Brought to you by Telehelping, a virtual assistant staffing company for professionals.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Cody Hall. I am the host of The Faces, Entrepreneur People 2, and the CEO and founder of Telehelping, a virtual staffing organization, and the herein sponsor of my podcast. So thank you, Telehelping, for allowing me to spend time every day with great people like Joseph. How are you today, Joseph?
I'm great, Cody. How are you?
Oh, I did think it was Tuesday again, so I had a little Groundhog Day effect this morning. And my wife thought it was Tuesday, and I was like, wait, please don't be Tuesday again. So other than reliving yesterday, everything's going all right.
Well, that's funny. Yesterday, I said to my wife, is it Monday? It feels like a Monday. She said, no, it's Tuesday. We had 2 Mondays in a row this week.
It feels like it. And we got a lot of sprints going on at Telehelping with new clients, everything. So I feel like everything's 100 miles per hour right now. So every day basically is Monday. As we say in the Marine Corps, when you're on deployment, every day is Monday because you're nowhere closer to the weekend.
That's great. Every day is day one.
Well, Joseph, just kick this off. Tell the listeners, who are we chatting with here today? Who's Joseph?
Okay, so I am, first and foremost, I'm a husband and dad of 4. I've got 4 beautiful daughters, and so I think of myself first as a dad. I'm also a lawyer, and my career has been centered around being a general counsel, serving general counsels, and particularly in the healthcare space. I started my practice at law firms, at large law firms, like many lawyers do. But I gravitated towards working for healthcare clients and eventually went in-house at a company called Baxter. I'm from Chicago. Yeah. Baxter's in Chicago. That was my first in-house job. And I really had a strong desire when I got there to become the general counsel, which in an in-house world is like the chief legal officer. Okay. And then I got that opportunity at the tender age of 36 at a company called DaVita, which is a Fortune 500 dialysis company. And things kind of went from there. It was a little bit like the dog who catches the fire truck, because it was definitely a challenging job, and I had to rise to the challenge, and there were lots of hard knocks and lessons learned along the way. And now I'm turning around and applying to help other people who are in those roles be successful, because I know how hard they can be.
Great. So you're doing an outside general counsel with your own firm.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it. I'm doing a lot of things right now. Like, yeah. When you said you have a lot of irons in the fire, because as entrepreneurs, it's a lot of self-inflicted busyness. And I don't want to say busyness, but like, we could just have regular jobs and it'd be much easier.
That is an absolute, I will not lie. Today I saw across my timeline that British Airways was taking no experienced pilots and training them at their own cost. And part of me was like, I want to fly 787, right? I've always wanted to be a pilot. And part of me for a moment there had 2 minutes of, what if I stopped doing so many things and just took a nice job, like just a job? It went away. It was gone really quick.
Where you had a boss and somebody telling you what to do.
Oh, you've lost me there. It's so funny. I mean, I am the worst employee, and I'm very forthcoming with my team all the time and telling them, how I would react in certain situations. But in light of the situation that I'm not the employee and they are, I look at things differently. However, I also let them know that I'm the worst boss to meet all day, every day. I am, horrible hours, subpar pay some days. I think I'm worth a lot more than I pay myself. And so I'm with them.
Not a lot of positive feedback in your head.
Yeah, it's constantly just always bombarding me with everything I've done wrong. And so, one thing you mentioned and I found interesting is, I do a lot, and I not only do I own multiple ventures, but what I find interesting about them is that And when I'm there, I try to make them feel like they're the only thing that exists, right? Because it's, as an entrepreneur, our brain is all across our table. However, when you're in your own little silos, you're like, all right, well, it's telehelping. Right before I jumped on, I was checking my equities company's holdings. Right, how are we doing today? Right, and then back to my podcast. And so you're always jumping around, but when you're in those things, you can't do it a disservice and be somewhere else.
Completely agree. I have a number of healthcare companies that I serve as their outside GC, and I think they think of me as, that's my primary or my only job, and I hope they think of me that way, because that's the idea behind it. I have a team behind me, but I'm the face of those relationships, and then at the end of the year, I launched my own podcast, and so I'm getting that stood up, so I know what that's like, and it's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of work. And now launching this new Inside Counsel Academy, sort of at the same time as everything else. I mean, it all centers around the same thing, which is serving in-house counsel, but each of them is a little bit of a distinct business in and of itself.
Well, just because you seem like a successful entrepreneur, I'll go ahead and pre-warn you when you start a podcast, all right? Which, I want to talk about that. More will come from it as well. And so it starts off as a podcast and you're like, hey, look at we started the podcast. We started getting viewers who reach out about virtual assistants, right? Not something I thought was going to be a thing. And I was like, well, I'm just going to talk to the people that I work with, which are accountants, lawyers, and CPAs. And then I started getting viewers as clients. And then I started getting people reaching out that I have a consulting relationship with from it. So warning, it's an open door. You don't know what's going to come through it. my original goal was like, maybe I can one day monetize this and it'll pay for itself. We've only been at it for 3 months and it's far beyond paid for itself already. So I'll take that as a blessing. That's great.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's great to hear. I mean, I think like any of us starting this, I'm sure it's the same way for you. It's like you're not doing it to generate revenue, but you just have an interest in people and in hearing their stories. Everybody has an interesting story.
I do this every day at 9 for the most part. Some people don't show up, some people have cancellations, but I generally schedule one every day at 9 because 9 o'clock is, I started trading around 5 a.m. And so I'm doing all my pre-work and everything. I'm running my screens in the background. I'm catching up. I'm trying to get everything done. And then 9 a.m. is like my changeover period, right? It's like, let me have a conversation with someone, have some, water for the first time. That's not coffee, right? And then after this, I'm going to go into telehelping. I'm going to have telehelping meetings. So this is like that buffer for me.
Transition. That's great. I love that. I love people who purposefully set out a schedule for themselves that is going to put them in the best position to be successful. And so many people and so many lawyers are completely reactive to their clients. And of course, like lawyers are in a client service business. Without a client, you wouldn't be a lawyer. But you can best serve those people if you've allowed yourself some structure to set yourself up to be at your best when you need to be at your best. And to have that, what I call deep work time from Cal Newport, where you've got it, where you don't have distractions and you leave yourself time to create and get work done, which is ultimately what clients are paying us to do, is solve problems, not respond to their emails or texts or be on phone calls, unless that's solving the problem, right? But you gotta be strategic and plan, and for that you need to have some quiet time.
No, and I will make this episode next week's homework for the week for my internal staff at Telehelping. I share out one podcast per week because, one, I get a lot of value out of this. It's a positive way to start my day. But also, I am talking to entrepreneurs in the same industries that we work with. And oftentimes my staff, maybe they're in finance, maybe they're in operations, maybe they're in legal, right? Because we have a lot of legal, right? Our business is people, therefore we have legal. And so, they don't get to always interact with the clients like maybe the account managers do. So I have them watch the podcast. It's like, get to know, these are the type of people we work with. These are the humans who are our clients, know them. And so I'll have them watch this episode because I think you'll be a great example of our legal side, but also, what you just said, you're getting paid more than just to respond, right? Because it's something I've been really hounding my team on, because I try to keep a low overhead, right? And I remind them all the time, like, I hired you because I thought you were intelligent, brilliant, you have great experience, right? I want you to be ahead of me in solving things. If you're just here to respond to my Slack message, I can get an AI chatbot for that. So, and I love it. Like, there needs to be a person behind that email, right? That is constantly strategizing on how to get ahead of the problems. Like a general counsel, a good GC should, you should see my potholes, before I get there, so that I, don't blow a tire.
Right. For sure. I mean, that is it. In my first GC role, I had the good fortune to work for a CEO who was constantly drilling home, I need you to be proactive, not just responding to the things I ask you to do. And so that, that was sort of new to me at the time, but I'm so grateful that, and a little bit painful, but I'm so grateful for that, because it really sort of changed my mindset, and I help others change their mindsets around exactly what their role is and what the company is expecting of them.
No, that's great. And I personally rather deal with the issues that come from being proactive than the issues that come from being reactive.
Yeah.
Right. Because over here you have people who are, maybe they're making mistakes because they're pushing beyond what you would expect from their normal scope of work. Maybe they're trying to say, WWCD, what would Cody do? Right. And, and then trying to solve for that before Cody himself discovers there's even a problem. Like, give me those problems. I'll take those.
You'd rather, rein people in a little bit than have to prod them.
Correct. I don't like prodding. But, I know that we jumped over here to the people real quick, but I want to get back to the first thing that you said, your first responsibility. So you're a husband, you're a family man. Talk to us when you're not lawyering and entrepreneuring, what's life looks like outside of work for you?
Oh, great. So I've got, as I said, I have 4 daughters. One is a lawyer she's a big law lawyer in Texas, and she's doing great. And she's so far ahead of where I was at that stage, so I've got great hopes and expectations for her as her career continues. And she's married and, is creating a beautiful life for her family. My second oldest daughter is also in Texas. I like to say we lost them to Texas. They went to college there and they loved it and stayed, and, always trying to get the rest of us to follow. But she's in grad school, so she's going to be an occupational therapist, always has been, the one to want to help people. And so she's going to be in a helping profession. And then I've got 2 younger ones who are in 8th grade and 7th grade. So I'm right in the middle of middle school, alongside them. And so that is a lot of fun and totally unpredictable. I say that the general counsel job is very unpredictable. But being the parent of a middle schooler, and anybody who's, been through it or is doing it knows how much, how chaotic and fun that can be.
Oh man. Well, first time you said you had $4, I said, wow, you have the worst luck ever. And then I thought, like, well, $4. I have $1.
It's actually great. It's great. And, we married off the first one, and I said, at the wedding, I said, it's 4 weddings and then my funeral. And but I mean that in a positive way, like that's the way life should work, right? So I take that, responsibility of raising the kids very seriously. I have a wonderful wife. She's partnering with me in in the new business, the Inside Counsel Academy. She also helps support our law firm, General Counsel West, where I do the outside GC services. So we get to work together on a daily basis, whether she likes it or not. So.
No, I love that. And I like that 4 funerals and a death. It reminds me that I was telling my wife, because that would be great, right? To have that experience, to see your kids grow up to that stage of life. And you're like, well, I pretty much did my job. I was just having this conversation with my wife yesterday as I met with my mentor. And one of the things that he was chatting about was what he talks to all his entrepreneurs about. So what is your purpose? Like, my purpose is to, build a foundation of wealth for future generations of my kids, right? Be a great example with my wife as to how my kids should have a relationship, and then be a good parent. All right. Look, if I just don't fail at those 3 right there, right, maybe they'll have like a really solid base. I'm trying to undo all the previous damage from my lineage, right? I didn't see my parents, grow up together. They were divorced, and my dad died when I was young. So I'm trying to write the future. And he's like, "Oh, that's all you're trying to do? That's it?" Right. And I said, "Well, I just want to do that and hope I may not even get to see the value I create." And then when you say, like, well, he said, well, maybe you will, maybe you'll get to see your kids grow up and start their career and have their first kids. Like, once you see that happen, you would have checked your box. He's like, you can go ahead and retire, cash out.
I love that. I mean, I'm a man of faith. So I think about what does God want me to do? And it, it's rarely like, oh, increase your revenue to this amount, right? Correct. Other than in very support rare. Of the bigger goals, like supporting the family and creating an environment where they can thrive and be successful in what they want to do.
Correct. Yeah. I as an internal metric, I said, if my kids wanted to join the Marine Corps like I did, I want them to join the Marine Corps because they want to go on an adventure, not because they lack financial stability and discipline, right? Which is, I had to go in there to find those things. I found them. They found you. They were there. But, I want them to be, I always tell my wife, so all the military, all the men in my family have served in the military. We've been in every war and conflict since the beginning of the United States. All of us, wow. My brothers, my uncles, my dad, grandfathers, right? My grandfather was on first wave in D-Day. And so all these men, I would like my son to be an officer. Like, okay, let's go. Let's not be the private, right? Maybe we can jump a notch. And, that's what I want from my kids. And that's all I work for every day. Hopefully for value that will last far beyond me.
I think that's great. I have a nephew who just went through one of the service academies, and 2 brothers-in-law who went through as well. And I didn't have any exposure to that when I was in high school and deciding what I was going to do next. And I so wish that I had, because that's exactly what I needed at that age. I just didn't know that I needed it. I eventually, found self-discipline on my own. But, it took a while, and I love that as a way to accelerate it. I mean, when I think about what I did in my first year of college, and then I compare that to my nephew who went through, I just was so envious of what he was being exposed to and doing. And it was like a little bit the opposite of what you think of as freedom. Like, hey, I'm going to college, I can do whatever I want. It was different from that, but that, they always say like discipline equals freedom. And I think that that's true. The formation that went in the transformation that I saw in him and others who do that, I think is a great path.
No, it is.
And one of my daughters might do. She wants to be a pilot. So, she might do Air Force Academy. We'll see.
I wish I was as smart as I am now when I was in my teens, because I definitely would have become a pilot. I always wanted to be a pilot. I just did the structure around education and, mathematics, discipline and things like that. They didn't exist for me then, right? I care about, I just got to make it through high school and I'm going to go to wrestling practice. And so like that's all I was going to do. I didn't get that. I didn't get the value in it until after the military, where I was like, oh, this is important.
100%. And, that's where I think young people can really, and sometimes it's their parents and sometimes it's not, looking for mentors who have, 30, 40, 50 years are ahead of them and have some wisdom in a way that you can't get from Chat GPT. And I worry, I worry about the young generation. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like, I worry that people think who are younger are like, oh, I can get all the answers I need, from Chat GPT or Google or whatever. But that's not wisdom. That's just information.
Correct. Well, that's what I tell people all the time. We're in an interesting industry where, when AI started doing the uptick, everyone's like, oh my goodness, are you worried? Who's going to use virtual staff? I'm like, well, sure. Okay. I hear, we don't do chatbots, right? We don't do virtual assistants for data entry or file keeping, anything like that. We're in legal, accounting, and financial management, professional based services. And I told people, I'm like, wow, I definitely see value in AI for what we do as a complement. It'll never remove the ability that a human has to think strategically about different elements of a problem, right? They can tell you, and I had some counsel in here before and we were chatting about AI. Everyone's like, draft this legal document for me, right? And they'll go on to ChatGPT and get a legal document and they'll use it as if it was the line in the sand for them, and not understand all the elements around it that leaves them exposed because they take it as the gospel, right? That's why you need humans. Sure, maybe that's a good 25% draft, right? Maybe that's a good framework, maybe. Right.
A starting point. Exactly. I don't know. I think that was the episode with Neil O'Donnell and Mihawk.
It was. I
thought that was great. Yeah, I enjoyed that one. I enjoyed listening to them.
No, and that's why I invest heavily in legal. We have a firm in Mexico, we have a firm in the United States because, we're a complex organization in terms of entity structure, which needs its own counsel and support. But also, we have client matters on the United States side, right? And which commonly is always the clients trying to steal our virtual assistant. It's always the issue. Solicitation, right? I always say we're back-to-back 3-time champion, right? Just for the record. We have great legal documentation, and then on the Mexico side, we will have our personnel matters, right? Yeah. And I will say I love a good calm storm. Everything's calm right now. Knock on wood. Don't have any lawsuits, but we've had some big ones, and this is exhausting. However, fell back on good documentation. Fell back on good counsel. And if I would have Chat GPT those documents, I would have been, as the old biblical statement says, SOL, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, legal services, are notoriously expensive. But the, not having good counsel, the expense of that dwarfs whatever you'd be paying on the front end. That's just the way it is.
It's in the name. It is counsel, right? Yeah. It's not information. And I think that's one thing that I've seen it nowadays in the Chat GPT conversation. You can have a conversation with Chat GPT, and I've seen people have a conversation back and forth, try to get advice from Chat GPT. No, once again, they're just feeding you information. They're not saying, well, here's the best route to go based on this experience, or they're not referencing, things that they've had go on in their life. They're referencing what they find on the open internet.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. I mean, it's a whole interesting conversation. One thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is how it just seems like ChatGPT has been released into the universe and sort of training people how to use it in a methodical way is not yet here, or at least I'm not seeing it, but it's going to come. There are going to be people who resisting it is going to be a temporary foolish thing, right? I mean, like it's here, it's coming, it's going to get better. You've got to learn how to harness it and use it for, to help you accomplish your goals. But you've got to okay, then you have to learn how to use it, not just from tinkering with it. But who's doing the training to help people get the most out of it yet? I haven't seen that, and I know it's coming because there's a lot of value. There's going to be a lot of value in that.
No, and I think, we work internally at telehelping to help our virtual assistants and our staff to leverage ChatGPT.
Yeah.
As a language intelligence, it's great because, if I had to say across all of our organizations, the most common theme would probably be marketing. Right? We have folks who use, in legal, for example, we have folks who use Mexico-based lawyers as paralegals, which is great, right? But we also have a lot of people who just use, regardless of their industry, virtual assistants for marketing, managing social media, email campaigns, advertisements. One thing that they benefit from using AI is being able to get the American voice, right? Because you could be a great marketer from Mexico, but unless you have experience to U.S. culture, American culture, you may be off a couple ticks. And so, we leverage our staff and say, hey, use this so that you can rewrite your things to meet that U.S. language. And likewise, it's a time saver. Like, why draft the framework of an entire job description based on a bunch of questions you had answered when you can have it drafted for you and then finish the last 30 to 40 yards yourself? And so,
absolutely. And what you said about being off a tick or two, you're using it for good. It can also be used for evil. How many times has it been an email being off a tick or two that caused us not to click on something that would have been a phishing email? And when that's cleaned up, how are we going to navigate that? How are we going to know what we can click on or not click on? I mean, this is going to be a big problem we have to solve.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's definitely a generation, from the counsel side of things, when you're working for future entrepreneurs, the more elements and degrees that are introduced through technology that companies have to work with, the more complicated law is going to get going into the future. I know that being on the financial side of things, the trading side, I'm very cautious, although I operate in a lot of forums and I communicate with a lot of people regarding, equities, not to ever give advice, right? It just because people reach out to me and I chat with people and I'm in live forums all day. I never want to be in the portion where I sound like an expert, because I never claim to be, right? And I never want to say that I'm telling someone to do something, because I'm never wanting you to do anything but except what you believe is the best for your situation. And I think that gets complicated as businesses continue to expand in things like AI. When does AI become responsible for giving us advice? And if it is giving us advice, who's responsible for that liability? Yeah. And so it gets a little bit more gray area.
There's so many questions. I mean, that's a great question. We'll, like, nobody knows. We'll see how that plays out. One question I have, I'd be curious to get your take on it, is in terms of, at companies, let's say corporate America, like big companies. I'm thinking that instead of having people at all different levels tinkering with ChatGPT, that there has to be an overall strategy for how can we leverage it in our business to the level of, like, I think that's going to be a C-level position, right? Like chief AI officer, because I'm not sure that it's the same person as the CIO, for example.
Yeah. And it's going to get more complicated and interwoven. We use across our organization 3 or 4 different AI programs. One of this being ChatGPT 4.0. We use all these programs, and you're right. There's a technical officer that exists, but in the future, AI is going to be so intertwined with everything we do. We almost have to look at it as its own staff member at some point.
Right. Like companies have chief human resources officers for the people. Would they also have an equivalent for the machine?
Who no, well, it's scary. And I was just, talking to my wife who may borderline be a conspiracy theorist. And she's always looking at things like AI. And one thing she pointed out to me is a lot of the content we're seeing on social media nowadays are profiles that everything about them is AI generated. The people, the
Really?
the photos, she was
Like
showing
on
something about this.
LinkedIn? Do you think LinkedIn? That's the only place I
the example she used was on Instagram.
Okay.
And it was like this profile, and she said, believe it or not, this entire profile is AI generated. Wow. None of these stories are real. These people are not real, right? They're just, but it's all created, and this thing had millions of followers. And what made me worried about this thing was not necessarily, oh wow, there's all this fake content, was like, people are going to take this as real. Like in this particular example, this woman left her husband to marry a Saudi Arabian sheik, right? And she was talking about her life as the fourth wife of a sheik, right? And then you're like sitting here like, whoa, someone's going to believe that this woman left her husband in the United States, moved to the Middle East to be a fourth wife, and in reality, nothing is real about it. And so my concern is where AI is not going to necessarily make our decision, but influence our perception of what reality is, right? And what people, because we take reality of what people are doing, right? People are doing this, therefore this must be important. But if you see these crazy fake stories and directions taking place, leading us off into the abyss, where does that take society?
Nobody knows. These are great questions.
It gets back to being parents, right? It gets back to being husbands, wives, business leaders. We just have to control what's in our bubble of influence, right? We have to figure out, well, how can we adapt to something, leverage it so we don't fall behind or become irrelevant, or so our kids don't become irrelevant, because they're going to grow up in a world where this is the normal thing, while also not overexposing them to the point where it introduces them to risk and or misconception. So we're just going to have to make those decisions. It's
a careful balance. Because we want them to not be completely unaware, but we also don't want them to be over reliant, because they're, young people in particular need to be developing their analytical skills, their ability to synthesize information, their ability to think and create. And those skills and muscles won't be developed if they're over reliant on the technology.
Yeah. Well, I think the initial comparisons I made to AI was that it turns every person into kind of their own executive, right? Where you now get to delegate out the smaller, low-level task of, do this, create it, and let me review it mentality. And which is great. We have folks who work for my company as virtual assistants that are VAs to people who work full-time jobs, right? And that person who works a full-time job is merely just a face to a company, and they have a virtual assistant doing their job for them. And that virtual assistant is doing AI. I was thinking to myself, well, great. Well, in 50 years, people may be doing jobs and AI actually may be doing it for them. They're just a social security number on a tax sheet. And they're getting an AI program to do all the back work. That is coming, because people right now are using my virtual assistants to do that. And that's fine. And however, it's going to become a program one day.
Yeah, you're all this talk is making me think. Recently on LinkedIn, I've started doing like a little bit of a career retrospective, kind of back to the start of my career. Once a week, I post, about that particular year, some lesson that I learned and some story. Yeah. And I did it because so much of what I see on LinkedIn is clearly AI generated. And at first it catches your eye, and then you're like, where's the substance here? You know what I mean? So I've gone in the other direction, done like very personal stories. I suppose that at some point AI could take all my stories once I've written them all, and then write stories better about me, better than I could. but hopefully we're not we're not at that point, but yeah, it's been a little bit of a like personal reaction to it on my part of like just wanting to be authentic.
And that's what it's going to come down to, authenticity. You know, they said that if you want to be unique nowadays, don't get tattoos, because everyone has
Right.
tattoos.
Right.
Right
You
now,
want to be the
it's like
exception.
AI.
Right. You can't go along with the crowd.
You know, one thing that I was thinking about yesterday as I was editing an article about lawyering with virtual assistants, actually, and I sat there as I was well over an hour into this and putting it all together. I was sitting there, I was like, wow, you know, I could see how people just pump these things out with ChatGPT, right? You know, I will sit there and I'll work on it one day, and then I'll put some more time in it whenever I have time to get the article out. But you're right. When you see these articles that are just ChatGPT, they're like hollow eggs, right? There's a shell there. It looks like an egg, but when you open it up, it's just a bunch of fluff and words, and it's very light. It's very surface level. And then how do you differentiate yourself between those? Is you actually have to do it yourself.
I hear you. Yeah. I mean, right. Somewhere in my past, teacher, or maybe it was a boss, you know, used the word vanilla pablum. Like, this is vanilla pablum. It's just so milk toast or whatever, you know. Like there's no authenticity.
Well, you know, one thing that I always say is my 3 words are consistency, quality, and intention. And so those are my favorite 3 pillars, the legs of my chair, as I say. If I can, whatever I do, if it has an element of those 3 in there, like, I know that I'm going to be producing my best work. And I think that if you use the humans are obsessed with a quick way of doing things,
right?
And the AI offers them that. And I think that's one thing that, you know, getting to the legal side of this is, you know, legal is expensive. We established that. Good legal is expensive. People are going to want to avoid costs just to get what they believe is the essentials, while missing out. It's like buying a car with no seatbelts, right? And it's like, you know, you have 4 wheels and an engine, it's going to move, right? However, you know, does it have what you need to really be protected? Does it have the bells and whistles that are required for your industry? And I think that's something that you're going to find yourself challenging in. I'm sure you already know this. And the legal side is, you know, how do we combat, you know, this cheap legal, this AI 100%. Cheap legal that.
Yeah, because there's going to be lawyers on the other side, like, just to continue your analogy, who are like, wait, you got injured, but you didn't have a seatbelt? Where was the seatbelt? You know, they're going to expose whatever you're lacking in your agreements or whatever, right? That's why it's important to have a real life human lawyer who's seen who's seen a lot of things, to know, oh, if we don't have this, they're going to use that to pierce a weakness in what we have. So yeah, consistency. What were the other 2? I want to write them down.
Quality, consistency, and intention.
Okay, those are great. Yeah, I mean, you had me at consistency, because that's one that I'm always harping on myself. I have ideas and then I start them, and like, really, consistency is a key to producing anything, you know, of value in the long term.
No, I agree, Joseph. And just to speak to and transition to the conversation about your firm, because generally about this time, that's when I do that, because I want to make sure that we touch bases there. Is, as a general counsel, are you, you know, we talk about healthcare. You know, I know who the dialysis clinics that you work with. You know, I used to be in healthcare. Know the organization well. Hired one of your former regional directors to be a COO for one of the companies at one point. So I know your organization well. Now, did you stick with healthcare as the GC of things, or as you did your own firm, did you diversify into other sectors?
Yeah. So when I left the dialysis company to start my own practice, and then later we made the determination to specifically focus on not just healthcare, but healthcare service providers. So, you know, we don't do pharma, we don't do medical devices, we do people who provide the healthcare services to the patients. And by, having that niche, we can become experts. I mean, the world is such a broad place. Healthcare is such a broad place. Like, if you're going to be really good at what you do, you've got to, unless you're going to be 1,000-person firm who can do a lot of things well, you've got to really focus and have a specialty area within. Like, we specialize in healthcare, but then we're generalists. So if you're going to be a generalist, you can't be a generalist to lots of different things. We had to pick an area so that we could be generalists within that area. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. And I actually had this conversation today with someone. They said being a generalist in a specialist world, and I was explaining to them that that's kind of what I am. I'm better at a lot of things than most people, but I won't outperform a specialist in one specific task. And I think that's a great way to be as a general counsel. You have to be diversified. Our GC for telehelping, which is separate from our outside firm, but we have a GC because, I mean, I need someone to text all the time.
Right, you need one person to be on point for all legal matters, and they need to have the judgment to know when they need to bring in a specialist to get a better outcome versus handling it themselves. And that judgment is what separates a great GC from a lesser one, really, is knowing what resources to bring to a problem are appropriate.
Yeah.
You don't want to always go to outside counsel and get a specialist for everything, but you also don't want to try to do it all yourself.
Correct. And I think you said it well. They're a great person to decide what additional steps need to be taken. Like, our GC is like, definitely want to, have a bigger firm in Mexico that can handle these matters. We're using a small firm at first. Like, you need a bigger firm. And then I, got an outside firm here because my GC is like, we don't do litigation. Right. And so, this is definitely something that if we're going to threaten litigation, we have to have litigation abilities. Let's go ahead and retain somebody. And so, he has allowed us to, I call him I'll refer to him as my general legal intelligence, right? I need someone to point me in the right direction, because otherwise you could be over retaining people, have people that, in a specialty that you don't need.
Right.
So, but it's nice to have someone who does a good spread to point me in the right direction.
For sure. And has and builds those relationships with outside resources. I mean, that's why when I watched your show with Neil and Mihawk, I reached out to them because I want to get to know them, because they may be able to help clients of mine, in particular areas. So I'm constantly trying to expand my network of legal service providers that could be helpful to my clients if the need arises.
Yeah. I mean, I did this with one of my clients yesterday who owns an AI startup, funny enough, very interesting startup. And I was like, what? We have another client who is a larger BPO that we do some work with. And I was like, I'm going to connect these two because both of them need each other, but they just don't know each other exists. And that's the great thing about having that expansive network of different legals. That, you have a client who needs Neil. Yeah, you can just connect those lines.
Yeah, exactly. So we provide general services to this specific, niche within industry. And we've got 10 people at the firm, and that's the size we've been for probably the last 12 years, and probably the size that we'll continue to be. We're not looking to, hit any sort of growth targets. We're looking to serve our clients well, serve our families well at the same time. We all know each other really well. We all know each other's kids. It's been really nice.
That's wonderful, Joseph. And now, one thing I love getting from folks from the podcast is, you're a well-rounded person. You're an entrepreneur, you're a lawyer, you're a family man, a husband. And I usually like to probe for advice that you give folks. And it could be general, but oftentimes someone I find in your position, as much the people I talk to, like, you have that one piece of knowledge that you love imparting to those folks out there you chat with. What is that advice?
Yeah, I'm gonna borrow one of your words and then add to it. It's intentional, right? So thinking ahead about what you want for your family, what you want for yourself, what you want for your career, and then mapping out a plan to get those things. Because otherwise, what are the chances you're going to land in a place that you want to be if you just sort of, let the wind take you in different directions? So it's setting that intention. And then the thing that I'll add is self-reflection. So I learned that from, one of the early leaders in an organization I was in, the importance of self-reflection, because otherwise, how do you know whether you're on the right path or not on the right path, right? You can set an intention to be somewhere, but unless you're, pulling back, looking at the map, looking at where you are and thinking about that, you may find yourself, off the path, especially, when you sort of get to midlife and, 20, 30 years have passed by, because anybody younger listening to this, like, let me tell you, it goes like that. Like, I still think of myself as that 36-year-old, who got the job he was chasing after. And that was, that was over 20 years ago.
I mean, Joseph, I love is checking back in yourself and looking back to see like where am I in relative to where I started? We call it shooting an azimuth and lead nav and sea navigation. You run for a certain distance and then you're like, all right, check the compass, check the map, right? Did I drift? Did the wind blow me? What's going on? And, I'll reference a gentleman that I had on the podcast. He said the worst thing that his dad ever did was buy a sailboat. And I said, he's like, that's when his marriage ended. So I was like, how did having a sailboat ruin the marriage?
There,
right?
Yeah.
Tell me more. And he's like, well, it became his hobby. And, when he wasn't working or hanging out with me, we were on the sailboat. And so if he was on the sailboat with me and he wasn't working, he wasn't with my mom. And mom didn't go on the sailboats. So every afternoon, every weekend, right, it just drift.
Wow.
And 20 years down the road, he had a great sailboat hobby, right? And the marriage fell apart because he never checked back to see, right, what do I have going on back here? How far am I away from where I started? And what we think sometimes is a positive turns out to be something that distracts us from our focus.
Wow. That's a powerful story. That's going to stick with me. Yeah.
I shared it with my wife afterwards and I said, no sailboats. So noted, not buying another boat. Well, Joseph, one thing that I want to do is, tell folks how to connect with you. I venture to say most people who watch us are entrepreneurs. Everyone who we have on is entrepreneur, and therefore they're running businesses. And I can't say enough. I'm such a huge advocate for general counsel and legal support. So how would someone get in contact with you if they wanted to have a further conversation?
Thank you. So it's generalcounselwest.com is the law firm, and it's joe@generalcounselwest.com. And then our new venture is Inside Counsel Academy, which is insidecounselacademy.com, and joe@insidecounselacademy.com. So pretty easy. I'm also on LinkedIn. That's, from a social media standpoint, that's kind of where I spend my time.
Wonderful, Joseph. And
let me plug in. Yeah. So, and also my new podcast, right? So, Becoming the GC. It's called Becoming the GC. And I interview people who are GCs about their path to that role. And even more importantly, like what they're doing, what they did to be successful to get that role, and then what they're doing in that role to be a successful GC.
Well, remind me in our follow-up to connect you with Vine. My GC not only is now we've become friends over all the years, right? But also he sits on my board now, and so we have a well-rounded board of medical, financial, accounting, and legal, because guess what? That's our industries.
Right.
Crazy. And he sits as our legal strategic advisor and board member as well. So I would love to make that. And he's a character. So I think you enjoy that. Well, Joseph, I thank you so much for making your time. As a busy person and an entrepreneur and a father, I know that every moment's valuable. So I appreciate the time you've given us today.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
Be well, Joseph. Thank you.
Take care.
This video was brought to you by our official sponsor,
telehelping. Need support for your business? Telehelping connects you with top-tier remote staff to help you streamline operations and fuel growth. Go to telehelping.com and get started today.